Hi, it's been a while since I've seen this logo. My name is Stephen Bryce. I am one of the Mad Twins making these films. I did Spread Your Wings as the writer and director primarily, with Colin Baxter producing. And between us, we did the majority of the behind the scenes work on this and a little bit of in front of camera stuff that I'll point out as we go along. This feature is Spread Your Wings. It is the one and only feature film that Mad Twins Films made together, released in a sense in 2005, mainly trying to make its rounds on the festival circuit and not doing the greatest, if I'm being honest. Though a very heavily edited version made its way onto YouTube and a few other video sites in 2007. And finally, in 2023, you are getting to see this uncut as a single, uninterrupted film the way it was always meant to be. Excuse me. And this was basically a little micro budget project for Colin and me, who were film students at the time, to try to gain some experience before trying to go out in the film industry. Didn't work so well in terms of being a calling card, but it still managed to get some attention, got some views, and we learned how to make movies this way. So in that respect, it was a success. This young lady on the screen is April Barlow playing the role of Ashley. Colin and I went to high school with her and pretty much everybody in the cast, really. April in particular was somebody that I had been meaning to do a project with for some time. Mainly just because she and I were similar creative minds. It has to be said, just about everybody in the cast was an experienced high school actor, but April was probably the most experienced one. So naturally I made her the lead in this movie. As for my own filmmaking experience, prior to this, I had done a little bit in high school, like directing a short movie and a couple of music videos. Had tried to do a couple of other things that didn't get off the ground. Interestingly enough, this moment here is from one of those aborted movies. It was going to be the first scene in a short movie I was going to do called The Healer that never got past the writing stage. But anyway, I had mainly been known for thrillers before and after doing this movie, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. Not only just have different gears in my creative toolkit, so to speak, but because I was really adamant about learning how to direct actors. That was something that had always been of big importance to me, but very frustratingly didn't get a lot of advice through formal channels about how to do that. It always seemed a little bit strange that all these filmmaking books and how-tos almost seemed to assume you knew how to do that. So I did what I could with what resources I had before then, but to be very honest, a lot of what I learned over the course of my career about directing actors, I probably learned just from directing the cast of this movie. So the lady that we're looking at now is Norma Kimmons, who is the real-life mother of Colin Baxter, as well as Tristan Baxter, who we're going to see shortly. And we're also seeing an example of where trying to be frugal on a $1,200 budget kind of backfired into Ed Wood territory, because you can clearly see that there are no pancakes on these plates that they were supposed to be eating from. So the insert that we saw a few moments ago was just something that I asked Colin to do during an off day, so we were constantly filming something. Excuse me, just as random shot that we did on our own of Colin putting pancakes on the plate, which is why you just see it happen on its own and you don't see Norma doing it. As far as knowing how to direct movies, some of it was formal instruction, some of it was DVD commentaries. At this point, I was a very spry 20 going on 21-year-old who was between years of the television broadcasting program at Mohawk College. So I knew a few things about camera setups and lighting, and through Colin's own stuff, I learned about mise-en-scene and more subtle storytelling elements. So it was, even though this was my only my second movie in the strictest sense, I didn't come in this completely unprepared. Oh boy, this is a story in and of itself. We're going on to Tristan Baxter and Kate Rind, who incidentally really were a couple at the time of making this movie. And not surprisingly, these characters were rather difficult to cast because there were a lot of people who, uh, within our geographical area and within this age range, uh, had some difficulty with the acting chops needed to play a teen couple facing an unexpected, unwanted pregnancy, which is probably not very surprising. But after a lot of trial and error, we did manage to find these two people who we already knew through various reasons, of course, Colin being Tristan's brother, of course, and I kind of knew Tristan indirectly from that. And I had met Kate a little bit in passing, so when we were struggling to find somebody to particularly play Beth, eventually she came into my mind. This is something to try. I didn't even know if Kate had an acting background of any kind, but we just read this scene here as her audition piece, and she did really, really well. Tristan playing, doing Eric's lines. Eric, sorry. It's been a while since I've seen this movie. I've forgotten some people's names. Sorry, and Tristan was just playing Eric's lines for the audition, just as somebody for Kate to react off of him. I wasn't even thinking of him being in the movie at that point. But when we finally cast Kate, it was a real case of hitting the ground running. Because at this point we were in the middle of production, just struggling to get things done. And sure enough, when we arrived at Andrew Carter's house to shoot these scenes, the actor intended to play Eric didn't show up and we couldn't reach him. So rather than waste a day's filming again, because this is not the first time this happened, I just decided to basically fire that original actor on the spot. And Tristan was there anyway for moral support for Kate, so I almost literally said, okay, take off your shirt, come upstairs, I'll brief you. And it is to Tristan's credit that he did as remarkably well as he did, because he had no acting experience at all. He certainly had never read the script, other than possibly whatever he and Kate might have read together when she got involved in it. He was really thrown in the deep end of this, and you would never know. He acted very, very well on this picture. Coming up on Nathan Marchanda now playing Craig in the third major storyline. And I'm going to try not to wax off too much about my own directing on this picture, but I do have to say I'm very proud of this introductory scene for Craig because, to be very honest, a lot of it was made up on the spot. What happened was we were setting up to film his end of the first conversation he has with Jeff, Andrew Carter's character, who we're going to see later. But the weather turned on us, and we had already filmed Carter's end of the scene, so I was very concerned about not matching it all. But I was also just as concerned about not wasting time either, because when you're doing a micro-budget movie, you really can't waste time at all. So I just had the idea of going to this park and filming basically the only other thing that we could with Nathan on his own, which is just a scene where we see him for the first time and get some sense of who he was. It had originally been conceived to take place in Craig's house and heavily involve his alcoholic, abusive father, in this case, discovered him passed out drunk. And as it was originally conceived, he was supposed to find refuge in his basement to do some drawing. When it became apparent that we would not have a location for that house or an actual actor to play the part, I sort of broadly reimagined it to take place in this wide open park anyway, but beyond that, didn't really have any specifics. So literally on the walk over from that field for the other scene to do this scene, I had to kind of map out in my mind what exactly Nathan was going to do. And interestingly enough, in about a half hour, I had probably my favorite scene in the movie. This thing with April looking around her house before walking out, you'll notice that she does something very similar at the end of the movie as she's moving out. This was something that I had kind of in the back of my mind for a teen drama for some time. Interestingly enough, around the time that I was leaving high school myself, I had this idea of doing a movie that was supposed to chronicle the 4 or 5 years of somebody's journey through high school, but I never mapped it out beyond that, probably because I realized I couldn't really do it. But this idea came into my head early on, bookending the movie with somebody coming into the school, taking a look around to try to take it in, and then the very last thing that they do before leaving school forever is taking one last look around from the same entrance, same point of view. So that was another thing I kind of recycled into this movie. And this is the very first thing that we shot in the movie. So this is probably why the coverage is a little bit more elaborate on this part, especially just trying to get these little things for Ryan playing Dan to do with the camera. The footage of the seagulls in the park was done by Colin. I think at the same time that I was taking some still photos. It was just one of those, again, pick up things that we were doing, just trying to grab these miscellaneous things to fill gaps in the movie coverage. And I probably asked Colin 20 years ago why his video footage of the scene is so tight, but I couldn't tell you what he said to me. It might have just been a miscommunication more than anything else.
It seems like everything's passing us by. I mean, it wasn't so long ago that we were all in kindergarten and meeting each other for the first time.
I must admit I'm a little bit self-conscious of my dialogue writing in this movie overall, but especially in scenes like this, because I'm trying to make a point. So I'm trying to have Ashley make the point about being very aware that life is kind of catching up with these teenagers already. They're about to enter the world and say goodbye to a major part of their lives. Whether or not this sort of dates the movie before the pre-social media ages, anyone is, I'll leave it up to you to decide. But it's a lot more on the nose than I would certainly prefer now. I would like to think that over the years I've maybe picked up enough good writing skills to try to be more subtle about it. But that's my arm, by the way, because like I said, we really could not find anybody to play Craig's father. Mostly because the only age-appropriate men that we could find either were not actors or were simply not interested in doing this. So for lack of any better idea, this is where we're kind of scraping the low-budget directorial barrel of ideas. I had no other idea except to try to play the father myself as a voice-only role with just these brief flashes of my arms and legs trying to illustrate, various businesses that the dad is doing, and trying to hope that between those things and what we see of Nathan's performance kind of flashing back to these things, that the audience would get the point of what is going on in his home. And again, I was always really self-conscious about the fact that I was having to do this when I was only 20, and certainly if you had looked at what I was like back then, I certainly didn't look like an alcoholic, abusive father. Maybe I have a better physique for a middle-aged man now, 20 years later, but yeah, I tried doing something to my voice to make myself sound a little bit older, but to be very candid, I didn't really know what I was doing, and the editing software that I was using at the time was not the most intuitive thing out there. So yeah, it's cheesy. I'm the first to admit it.
You can't trust your family and you can't trust your friends. Who's that lead?
Sorry, I'm talking over Andrew's introduction. This is Andrew Carter, who's the only holdover in this movie, other than Colin Baxter's cameo as the guy taking Dan and Ashley's picture earlier. Carter is the only person in this movie who had done the movie with me before. He was actually the main bad guy in my other movie, The Sulphur Conspiracy. I was a little bit reluctant to put any old faces, so to speak, in this, but eventually I just realized he actually was appropriate for this character. Oop, brief jump cut, sorry. I think here. I tried to clean it up for this version of the movie as well as I could, but you'll notice that there are a couple of like single frame glitches from time to time, and that's an artifact of how this movie evolved over the course of its history, because it was initially screened to the public in 2005 at a film festival at McMaster University in a very bloated state compared to this. And it was reasonably well received, but you could definitely tell that we were testing people's patience with this thing. So later on, I cut not a lot out of this movie, but I mean, just tried to trim the fat a lot. Except that by that point, I was using Windows Movie Maker because that was all that I could get a hold of inexpensively. And if you ever used Windows Movie Maker, especially in the XP era, it's not a terrible editing program, but it is a little bit clunky compared to other things, including even stuff that you can get on smartphones these days, to be quite honest. So trying to remove clips after the fact is going to result in the odd glitch here and there.
Jeez, what? Jeez, man, what were you thinking?
Now, as I said before, the stuff at what is supposedly Beth's house is actually at Andrew Carter's mom's house at the time. So we were able to film Andrew's voice on Tristan's end of the conversation live. And interestingly enough, that is the only time that he acted with any of the other cast members during this movie. So that's just one of those things when you're trying to do a micro-budget movie with several different people who have their own lives. You kind of grab them where and when you can and stitch it together in the editing room.
Jeff, are you there?
Now, strangely enough, when I was filming Andrew's end of this conversation, where he's in what's actually Colin's basement, for some reason I got very weirdly elaborate with the camera work, because if you pay attention, every time you see Carter, it's an entirely different shot, different camera angle, often a different zoom size. And basically what I did was, for every time that he had a line, I would have him pause afterwards, and I would physically move the camera around to get these different angles, with the idea being that as we would cut back to Tristan's end of the conversation and back again, it would I guess, visually convey how tense the conversation is getting, because this is a rather serious argument. And I got the idea from this thing in El Mariachi, which is already a broad inspiration for this micro-budget filmmaking thing in the first place. But there's this scene in El Mariachi where a hitman in the movie is confronted by these gangsters. And the lead gangster is threatening him at gunpoint while opening his guitar case that he expects to be full of weapons. Every single line is a different zoom size on the camera, and how that was done was after every line, the camera would zoom in or out, depending on how tense the line was meant to be. With cutaways disguising those zooms, and the idea being to try and make it look like it was filmed over the course of maybe an hour or two, and make it look more flashy and high budget than it actually was. Now, this scene was rather hard to film because for some reason I wanted originally to do this as a single take. It is obviously one of the more draining emotionally scenes in the movie, with, again, two actors were thrown in this at the last moment. And it took more takes than anything else that we did. And after, I think, the seventh take of that initial wide shot, I started to get more pragmatic. The performances were at a point where I was happy with them, so basically just, as the tension mounted anyway, use that as an excuse to break up the editing a little bit, so just try and move things along in the argument and edit around that.
I'm surprised you didn't lose it.
Now, this is another example of trying to make scenes in the editing room because April and Ryan, the actor playing Dan, we filmed. This is like the second scene that we had filmed in the whole movie. But Tristan and Kate were filmed a month or two later. And this is a bit of a nightmare color match, by the way, especially because the light where Ryan is sitting tend to make him look green when we try to match him to Kate and Eric's end of the scene. It probably would have been easier to color correct Kate and Tristan's end of the scene, except that Kate, as you can see, is wearing a very, very flimsy top, so I was a little bit worried that people would think that she was going to catch pneumonia or something from a strongly overcast day. So that kind of was how I was forced to do the color correction on this. And again, stitching things together for this scene because, again, these two were not acting together. And in fact, makes a lot of these interactions with Kate and April very interesting after the fact, is that to this day they have never met as far as I know, and yet they have these very emotional scenes a couple of times in the movie.
I don't mean to pry.
I try to disguise it as well as you can, but if we're being honest, you can kind of tell from time to time that Kate has to look down at her script to sometimes remember what the next line is.
What about you?
I should have been a little bit more diligent about having her pause and then do the line again, but at this point I guess I wasn't totally certain where I was going to be kind of away from things. And if I'm being honest, the majority of the movie was filmed in like this brisk 2-week period in the middle of, I think, July of 2004. But because of all these problems with the wide cast that we had, by the time we came around to Kate and Tristan, it was actually September 11th of that year. And frankly, I can't speak for everybody, but I was certainly very drained emotionally and mentally by this process. So I was probably a little bit eager to just get it in the can quickly and move on.
It's hard to picture life without you guys.
And honestly, bless April's heart for her acting in this scene. Interestingly enough, she was exactly like this when we first rehearsed this scene. In retrospect, I try to have like a broad rehearsal for everybody involved in the movie, just because I was very anxious about getting the performances right beforehand. In retrospect, it was sort of a waste of time, if I'm being honest, because most of the people that even showed up wound up getting replaced anyway. But April was the only holdout. April and Carter, I should be saying, were the only people who were there for the rehearsals and survived to make the movie, so to speak. And interestingly, April was just this good in the original rehearsal. I actually said to her after finishing the scene, okay, if you can do this on the day, we're definitely good.
They just take a lot of strength, that's all.
I suppose now is a good time to finally talk about restoring this movie, if you can call it that. It's a little egotistical sounding, because this movie was shot in digital 8. So this is basically what is known in the video making world as mini DV quality, very much like DVD, standard DVD quality.
What are we doing?
And
Let's go.
I suppose a little bit grandiose vision expecting this to hold up as a theatrical feature film, but that was our pipe dream back then. So when I finally got around to trying to put this back on YouTube as a single film, the way it had always been meant to be, I guess I just decided to go for broke. Maybe some of it was ego, and some of it, the only real excuse I can make for it was just to preserve the picture as well as I could after everything that it's been through. I decided to just go for broke and restore it in 4K. It's also converted to 24 frames per second, like it had been shot on film. Though, if you've ever seen native 4K 24p footage, you would definitely never mistake it for that. I suppose this is just a little bit of wish fulfillment, as close as we're ever going to get to theatrical quality screening. This is also sized to fit your frame, thankfully. This is also in Colin's basement, by the way. This is the third major scene that we filmed. And I think I'd already anticipated at this point that we're going to be having to double up locations, because if I had panned the camera just a little further to the left when Ryan came down, you would have seen the little weightlifting bench that Carter was sitting on earlier.
It's a lot of fun.
These cards from Myrtle Beach were provided by my grandmother, by the way, because she frequently went down to vacation in the summers at the time. And this is a little bit of an inside joke as well, because with Dan's last name being revealed here as Archer, and him having an adopted brother who goes by the name John, that extension means that his brother's name is Jonathan Archer. At the time, Star Trek Enterprise happened to be on the air, and that was the name of Scott Bakula's character. Where it becomes an in-joke is that around the same time that I was doing Spread Your Wings, I had actually written an episode of Enterprise for a script writing contest. It got eliminated in the first round, mind you, but it was still kind of fun. Oh boy, this is a scene that was built up entirely in the editing room, because the one part that you see of Nathan in this whole montage was just lifted from the earlier scene. All these point of view shots were just me walking down the sidewalk, trying very carefully not to actually show my house, and especially the house number. Because as it became apparent that I was forced to do these scenes in my house, I actually had to kind of do this behind my mom's back. I was living at home at the time, and my mom was extremely adamant that her home not be visible in the movie. So I had to do a little bit of sneaking around here, but again, the things you have to do to get the movie made. Naturally, this was intended to be a confrontation you would see on camera in the original script, with much more of a vicious two-way argument that, frankly, motivated the being a little bit better than Craig just kind of staring at his dad, as the movie implies. Don't bother looking for my name in the acting credits, by the way. The reason why I take an alias, did this weird stage name of Arnold Ryden after a character I'd written in a play once. To be really honest, I was really disturbed by my own performance in that scene, so I just wanted to distance myself a little bit from it. And I jokingly call that whole montage How to Earn an R rating in 10 seconds.
Jesus, man, what the hell?
Probably the more infuriating thing about shooting the movie was that Nathan in particular was very difficult to get a hold of. He was a fantastic actor when we actually got to work with him, but it was like months apart between filming his material, and by the time we finally got to film his end of this scene, it was like early to mid-November. You don't see him in this scene because
that's what he said anyway.
I filmed Carter stuff a little bit earlier in the year, of course, but the weather was already starting to get kind of cool. I was worried that at any moment it was going to snow, and by the time Nathan became available, he needed a coat on to perform the scene. So I recorded him in this location to get the sound to match, but it was his voices. It was just a voiceover part in the end. So Carter is acting against me, actually, as is the case for a lot of these interactions.
I don't know, but there's got to be something I can do.
Sorry for some background noise. And those are my feet doubling for Nathan now.
Friends, a life.
I'm still not really sure if I walk anything at all like Nathan would in this scene.
I'm just a backseat driver.
And I apologize tremendously for how weird the scene looks. It is kind of odd for a movie that otherwise plays relatively straight-faced.
Just depends upon what you're willing to go through and endure sometimes.
I really had no other ideas. This is definitely
You sure about that?
burning the candle at both ends, is trying to get this thing made. And with all due respect to Nathan and Andrew as actors, especially taking a leap of faith uh, in this cockamamie movie idea of mine, if I had known how much of a problem it was going to be to get their end of the movie done, I probably would have just done away with their characters altogether and try to do more material with the other two storylines to beef it up. By the way, did you notice the camera tripod hanging around the background in that scene? I'm not exactly sure why it was there, considering I probably would have used the tripod for some of that walk.
Hey, buddy, what's
It's
up?
kind of a weird comment to make out of context now that I think about it, so I should explain. One of the examples of jury rigging that I tried to do with the camera work in this movie was basically use an old tripod as a poor man's Steadicam, and it did work to a point. So why I didn't use it during that walk in the baseball park, I'm really not sure, but
What a pile of shit. Shouldn't he already be living by now?
yeah, there it is.
It's not really too late to start, you know?
That's why I'm gonna make a fresh start as soon as I get out of here.
I've never been totally sure how visible it is in SD, but we did put some bruising makeup on Nathan's face for this post-beam black eye.
Fix graduation.
And, you know, as eager as Nathan was to do the movie overall, and he was a pro on the performance, for some reason he always kind of whinged a little bit about the black eye makeup, which is a little bit weird considering that the first time that I actually talked to him in person about doing this, he had just literally just come off the stage at a production of Guys and Dolls that the high school was doing. And boy, did he have much heavier makeup on for that than he did for this. I mean, it really is kind of startling if you're not familiar with stage makeup. It's kind of startling to see an actor in person
See, you've already got
coming off of a live theater performance, because with the lights you don't really notice it, but it's actually pretty severe stuff.
And let it all go to hell.
You?
Well, let's just say I've had so many of those mistakes.
This zoom on Nathan and some of the zooms with Kate when she's talking to Tristan earlier in the movie are probably less extreme examples of what I was trying to talk about with moving the camera around during dialogue scenes. You know, it's just simply a matter of having the actor pause for a second and zoom in. So maybe I learned my lesson by that point.
Are you going anywhere? Well, I got some nice movies at my place if you want to go, come check them out.
Alright, sounds good. Let's go.
One of the more unfortunate things that happened as a result of the chaotic acting schedules was that some scenes weren't filmed, and one of them was that originally it was revealed. I mean, it was revealed anyway that that Eric and Jeff were in a band together that was already having to go their separate ways as everybody moved on to college. But originally, there was going to be a scene where Ashley had hung out with them for a little bit and actually wrote and helped perform a song with them that was supposed to kind of reflect on where everybody was at emotionally at that point in the movie. And it was meant to be kind of a turning point for everybody character-wise, which is also part of the reason why later on, Tristan's character has a somewhat more mellow personality. This is something that Norman had actually called out when we were screening it for the cast later on. And I felt a little bit bad that I didn't think to cover that transition in some other way.
I don't know. Have you ever felt cut off from people, from your life?
How do you mean?
This is definitely a scene that was a directorial nightmare because it is a talker that goes on for quite a long time. And for whatever reason, I decided to carry the majority of the conversation with just these back and forth camera angles that don't really change all that much between the same two people. Yeah, except for those couple of insert shots of the cards that are done very early in the scene. It's basically just these two yammering at each other. No offense again to April and Kate.
Like you and Eric,
And a little unfairly, to this day, I kind of think that that makes up more of the movie than it really does. I mean, there are these conversations that are the majority of the character interactions of the thing. Though looking at it now, I actually do cover it a little bit better than I initially thought. I mean, this is probably just an example. I'm not really sure what else to do, especially because with the actors not really being together, I was kind of unfortunately locked into certain decisions by that necessity. I mean, there were only so many camera angles that I could show without showing that they were not on set together, and unfortunately they couldn't really ad-lib, so the dialogue was kind of in stone more than I would have liked, especially as it became apparent that I couldn't write particularly dramatic dialogue very well. On a more upbeat part, it was kind of interesting watching April's end of this performance because a lot of her mannerisms are strangely similar to Carrie Fisher's screen test for the original Star Wars, and that was entirely an accident. I mean, interestingly enough, around the time that we were in production on this movie, the original Star Wars trilogy came out on DVD for the first time, but it didn't get released until after we had filmed this. So there is no way that we could have seen that screen test and had April influence her performance by it on purpose. It was just this strange thing that happened naturally.
I just thought of something. How do you feel about...
In retrospect, I can't help but think a little bit about the rather cringy moment where April name drops the movie, spread your wings and fly out of these traps, birds command the skies, etc. Yeah, I overdid with the name drop. I apologize for that. But where it gets a little interesting in retrospect is when the Bohemian Rhapsody movie came out. Yes, there was already a Queen song called Spread Your Wings. I very much used that title for the movie on purpose. But actually, now that I think about it, I completely skipped that story. Originally, I was going to use the song in the movie, but I couldn't. Well, I could get the rights to it, but I couldn't really do anything financially with it because the record company that Queen had in the States at the time, they wanted way more money than we could afford. Queen, for their own part, were very, very accommodating. They were willing to let us use it for free. But yeah, anyway. So as a result of all those shenanigans, I did originally edit the movie with the Queen song in it, under the assumption that everything would work out, only to have to hastily cut it out when that fell on its face. Sorry. So interestingly enough, there is another lost edit of this movie that is only in possession by a handful of people very privately, among them being Queen, one of the biggest rock bands ever. So it sits in their archives. And interestingly enough, in the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, there is a line that the fictionalized version of Freddie Mercury makes, referencing the song to John Deacon, who did write the Spread Your Wings song in real life. And basically, the written is for trying to do something solo, I gotta spread my wings and fly away a little bit, or something to that effect. And yeah, it's a generic enough phrase that in and of itself it's probably very innocuous, but in the back of my mind I kind of wonder if that was meant to be a shout out to this movie. I mean, yeah, it's a very big long shot, but at the same time, the producers of this movie, so the producers of that movie are among the few to even know that this movie exists, so theoretically possible. That was a real blooper, by the way. I just wasn't sure how else to end the scene, so let's roll with it. Kind of the unfortunate thing about this party sequence is that it was specifically designed to bring all these kids together. Ideally get all 6 of them in the same shot at least once, but because nobody was available, it didn't really work out. Tristan really was exhausted on the counter, by the way, because again, one of those things about micro-budget filmmaking. By the time we finally got to film these two actors, we were kind of crunched for time, so we basically did all of their scenes in a single day,
Well,
including a couple of things that were cut out of the final movie, by the way.
Couple weeks.
So, yeah, Tristan really was wiped. And again, bless his heart. I mean, he
We're both
had
scared.
almost no preparation and no experience either, and yet he did remarkably well.
Didn't stop me from trying to run after you, though. If you want me to be there for you in any way, I'll promise you I will be.
I mean, especially doing a scene like this
You know it's
is
just a baby, but
very vulnerable,
Eric, I don't know
and
what to say.
it's not like I'm asking you to
putting,
marry me.
oh man, I can't even imagine
But you are
what it
asking
must be like in real life going through a situation like this.
I guess so, but I guess that's pushing it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, this
I
might
don't know if
be
we should
a
get
situation where
that
the
close
two of them
against
being in
association.
real life probably helped a lot, because
I'll
it,
definitely think about it.
to the degree that Tristan knew things about motivation and subtext. I mean,
I promise.
being able to say these sort of promises to somebody that he really did love at the time probably helped a lot.
And the food. I don't know if it's
Hey, well, you know, a shot where there are two actors in the frame at the same time. Sorry.
What was that all about?
I kind of have jokingly called this shot my award-winning shot, because one of the few positives of that film festival at McMaster, where the long and fat version of the movie was shown, is it actually won an audience award for best cinematography. And aside from the obvious, one of the reasons why I'm particularly proud of that is that this entire movie was lit with practical and natural light.
Yeah, I have actually.
Now, there are times when you can tell for the worst reasons, but in a scene like this, for instance, is an example where it works really well, because I had the key light for Carter's shot here just be a lamp that's off camera, and it's part of the room anyway, so I don't really need to disguise it. There's a little bit of fill from the window light on the opposite side of him, and the rest of it is just the way that the room naturally is. I mean, wherever possible, naturalism is a lot easier in interior scenes. We did try to just have existing lights fill in the same sort of parts that you know, a studio or field light rig would be able to do.
I can't erase you guys more than I can erase my dad.
And that was actually one of the things that we had to test rather extensively in pre-production once we realized we were going to be shooting on basically a mini DV camcorder. One of the things I did to test this was I borrowed a digital camera from one of my classmates at college, and I was a little bit amused when he basically said to me, this works great when there's a lot of light. I was polite enough to not actually say this particular rebuttal, but basically in the back of my mind was, well, any camera will give you a great picture when there's a lot of light added. I want to know what this will do when you abuse it a little bit, because I knew that we weren't going to be able to properly light every scene in the movie. This is an example where it doesn't work, because everybody else, Tristan and Kate, look like they're in a fog for some reason.
As closely tied together as they are right now. And even though most of you probably haven't said it yet, I should probably say what we're all
I
thinking.
cannot tell you how much I got kind of sick of this speech in the end of filming the movie, because naturally this had to be read to everybody to get their reactions. And we're about to see an unfortunate example of good lighting being undone by color correction. Because everybody else, by the time we filmed everybody else in the scene, it had been decided to change that the scene would take, this part of the scene would take place during the day. But when I filmed when I filmed Ryan and April, at that point the scene was supposed to still take place at night. So I had lit them accordingly day for night, and it actually turned out really, really well. Only that we had to undo it when we changed it for everybody else. But at least we still had that good moment. There were a couple of times when I thought about picking up on this movie over the years, but we all just kind of drifted apart for various reasons. And truthfully, some of the places where I would have wanted to take the characters, actually in particular, because she does kind of get off light in this movie, if I'm being honest. I really would have wanted to put some of these characters through the ringer for like a 10-year revisit on where they are in their 20s or later on still in their 30s. I was just really worried that people would read way too much into it. So in the end, this movie stands on its own. I'm very happy with that. I mean, sure, I think all the time about where these characters would be by now, like 10, 20 odd years later, but it's probably best just leave that in my head. So, 20 years later, looking back on this, I'm not going to pretend it's a masterpiece. I do think that it has its merits. I do still enjoy these performances. In a lot of cases, elevating what I brought to the table myself as a writer. I certainly make no apologies about trying to get out of my comfort zone of dark thrillers that I was in a lot of the time as a filmmaker. It would have been interesting to see what I could have done with other dramas or even just other character-based movies with a better writer behind things. Maybe one day I'll find some way of doing that, but right now this was intended to be a learning experience, and it definitely was. Which leads me to one last opportunity before this wraps up. April taught me something very, very important about directing actors, which is that oftentimes you don't need to say very much. It's tempting to go through these long explanations about where a character is supposed to be, what you want them to do, but a lot of times actors know what they're doing. Just get out of the way a lot of the time. Make sure they know what the moment is, but other than that, just let them try things. And that is it. Spread Your Wings. The one and only feature film that Mad Twins did. One of the many ventures that I did with Colin Baxter, and found several friends kind enough to tag along for the ride. And I hope that you enjoyed watching it, warts and all. Thank you very much for bearing with me on this commentary track, and I hope you like the movie on its own merits too.